David's keynote presentation, Unveiling the Adversary, War Stories and Discoveries from the Human Element, will dive into how businesses can prepare for advanced scams and attacks. Dave has over 20 years of experience in pen testing, incident response, and threat intelligence, becoming a vital member of the cybersecurity community and succinctly summarizing threats to the general community through his frequent press appearances. Dave, the floor is all yours. I'll be back for a short Q&A at the end, and excited to hear what you have to say.
So thanks everybody so much for having me for the Human Risk Management Conference. What a great topic around social engineering, hacking, everything else that you hear out there today. My stories today are going to be live stories that are things that we deal with on a regular basis. I run two very large global cybersecurity companies, Binary Defense and TrustedSec. We're all over the world. We do work with 3 of the Fortune 5, 70% of the Fortune 1000 companies, and it's interesting to see all of the different things that continue to happen out there. And with the progress of what you see with, artificial intelligence and machine learning, a lot of buzzwords that are out there, but also, how adversaries are leveraging this on a regular basis. It's very difficult now to navigate what the attackers are doing and how they're changing how they go after organizations and people. So today's talk is really going to be diving down into some of the stories out there, but also what you can do to protect your organizations and corporations out there with what we see in the elevation of attacks. I am the author of a number of exploitation frameworks, one called the Social Engineer Toolkit, which is a tool that I wrote to help organizations test social engineering. It's amazing to see a lot of these different groups that are out there from an adversary perspective, the capabilities that they've been able to build. If you look at some of the most recent data breaches, like for example, MGM and Caesars, all predominantly through calling up the help desk, phishing users, getting access to an individual system, and then from there using that access to gain access to the rest of their infrastructure and organization. Caesars paid, I think it was, $20 million or $17 million, I think it was negotiated down to. MGM did not pay. MGM, the attackers used voice modulation software to remove any type of accent. Usually we see Eastern European, Russian, Ukrainian accents. They remove those. They're able to talk, like a Southern individual, somebody from the South, somebody from New York, have different profiles and languages you can apply to it. So we're going to dive down into some of those as we go through today and get into some really interesting stories that we see. Just a really quick introduction to myself. And thanks again for the brief intro. I've been in the security industry for over 20 years. I think I'm going on 26 years. My experience is working in the cybersecurity space for the intel community. So I worked for the National Security Agency doing cyber warfare. And I did 2 tours in Iraq and one in Bahrain and Afghanistan for intelligence-related missions. And got out and was a chief security officer for a Fortune 1000 company, all the way to the 2 companies that I started out there. But I've helped forge cybersecurity policies for the federal government. I've testified in front of Congress on numerous occasions. I'm always on the news. In fact, if you turn on CNBC tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern time, I will be on CNBC. I was on CNBC yesterday. A lot of hacking going on in the news right now. We had a distributor for cars. Car dealership software go down today, which knocked out about 75% of the car dealership. So if you're looking to go buy a car today, I would wait. They can't process cars right now across the United States. So these cyber attacks are getting real, and real live news coming to you right here live, which is pretty interesting. 2 interesting tidbits about myself. I helped out with the TV show Mr. Robot. So I worked with Rami Malek and Christian Slater on their hacking stunts and skits. And I also was in a Chris Brown rap video, believe it or not. I was a hacker in a Chris Brown video, and I did all of the stunts and skits for them. So never thought coming into the cybersecurity industry as a computer nerd, I would be in a Chris Brown rap video. In fact, they told me to stop dancing because I was offbeat. So I guess I can't really do that very well. But, fun times doing cybersecurity. So if you look at what has changed and what's different from the early 90s and 2000s, we've made a lot of progress in cybersecurity, a lot. And, you could say, hey, companies still struggle with defense and struggle with adversaries and attackers. And that's absolutely true. But what's changed is that if you look at when I first got into this industry, I was doing penetration testing, red teaming, and my whole career has been on offensive security. I helped create what's now the PowerShell security movement. I did the very first talk ever on PowerShell. Worked with Microsoft on building defensive capabilities in there. Jeff Snover, the creator of PowerShell, calls me the father of PowerShell security, which is pretty cool. You look at the times back then, and we were so myopically focused on fixing vulnerabilities within our organization. So if you had a penetration test done or there was a new critical vulnerability, you would patch it. and next year I'd come in again and I would hack a different way, and I'd hack a different way. The next year after that, we're doing these magic things that it was super easy to break into any organization or company. I had a 100% success rate, in the early 2000s going into probably 2016, 17. Then it started changing, started becoming a lot harder to break into organizations. And the reason is that we started focusing less on the technical vulnerabilities, still important, but we also started looking at what are the attackers doing against our organizations, and what are the patterns of behavior they exhibit, and what can we do to really try to shut that down so that in the event, even if we have a vulnerability or we have an exposure or we have a weakness, can we make it much more difficult for those attackers in later stages to actually gain access to systems? And that goes for social engineering as well. So, education and awareness, limiting our user accounts so they don't have massive privileges like local administrators, being able to reduce our attack exposure so that in the event we get breached, it predominantly protects us and hopefully insulates us a little bit more so the attackers have to go through other steps. Additionally, you look at what happened with cloud. There was a big push for moving to cloud infrastructure. So the normal hacking a machine inside your internal perimeter, and then from there leapfrogging to other systems, which caused all of this catastrophic damage, became much harder. Now, as attackers got more advanced and as we became more advanced with our technologies, the attackers started, investigating cloud infrastructure. They started looking at that as an attack avenue. They started looking at supply chain attacks. You look at what happened with SolarWinds and being able to tuck code in and hit, thousands of people versus just a couple or one or two. Cloud-centric environments are things that have really changed, the dynamics of how we look at going after different types of companies and organizations and being able to hit organizations at a much larger rate. There was just a recent report released by CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency. When they're coming up with that name, I'm not sure why they said security twice. It always gives me a tongue twister, but it's the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency. And CISA released a scathing report against Microsoft, basically stating that Microsoft has almost no security controls to protect their customers. They rely on customers to notify them of data breaches. And what happened was that last year in 2023, Microsoft experienced a pretty catastrophic data breach where they believe, because they still don't know to this date, what happened. They're not 100% sure, but one of their contractors was compromised, and then they were able to have an initial foothold into there, and then got access essentially to their code signing certificates and allowed them to basically jump into any Azure tenant they wanted to. And so these adversaries, most specifically from China, had access to 24 different companies they were looking at from an espionage perspective, intellectual property theft perspective, and other motives that we see from China themselves. And so, we're relying on cloud infrastructure to be, secure and locked down, whereas CISA is saying, Microsoft literally doesn't have a security program to handle these types of attacks anymore, and they're far behind GCP and AWS when it comes to what they're trying to protect. So, we rely on these additional defenses, and it's gotten better, but the adversaries have gotten better. And still to this day, the main way that we see most organizations get compromised is through the human element. It's the easiest way. If you think about it, if you have 10,000 employees, 20,000 employees, well, if I fail social engineering on one person, I have 19,999 more to go. Then I have 19,998, 19,997. And finally I get somebody to click a link, and all of a sudden now we have direct access to their infrastructure or computer, right? And then from there, we start to move to other systems and start moving through. I was just dealing with a personal case recently, and even on the personal fraud and scams, they've gotten substantially better. Horrible case. We had a personal friend. If anybody's seen the movie Beekeeper with Jason Statham, where they extract all of their, bank accounts and things like that, it's obviously a lot of blowing up and explosions and killing of people. And it was actually I agree, Lori, a really great movie. And something like that actually happened very similarly to a close friend. Very organized group. They had used previous breach data, so they knew their passwords, they knew websites they used, and they had access to the individual's emails. They spoofed their phone number coming from Chase Fraud Services. So, when you look at your phone, it looked like it was actually coming from Chase Fraud Services. And they said, hey there, we're noticing some unusual transactions. Now, they already had access to Chase at that point because the passwords that our friends were using were the same passwords across the board. Again, no accents, things like that, anything that would throw it off. And when they started listing off transactions, they knew specific transactions that the people had actually made. The individuals, because they had access to Chase's Chase's accounts, but they didn't have the ability to transfer money out and didn't have access to all their bank accounts. So what they did is they basically established a layer of trust and had access to some of their accounts already, but they wanted to have access to everything. So, my friends are literally hook, line, and sinker because they have actual transactions. They're coming from on our phone from Chase Fraud Services. And then they started listing off other transactions. Hey, your account's been compromised. And so, they start freaking out. And the people on the phone, the attackers, gave them another number to the FBI to report fraud. So then they call this other number to call the FBI, and it has a voicemail, voice messages, press 1 to this, report an incident, press 2 to this. Again, all believable pretexts. And they called the FBI line, got an individual person to, report this fraud. And then the person started going through like, hey, what other accounts do you have? Let's make sure that we have access to those, or that they don't have access to those. What are the passwords? We don't recommend changing them right now. Let's figure out what they have access to so that we can do this. And so they enumerated all of these individual accounts, and at the very last minute, drained all of their accounts. And so at that minute there, they drained the accounts, drained all their bank accounts, every single one of them. They had 6 different bank accounts, drained every single one of them, and took all their money. So, the sophistication level of having access to their information, having previous breach data that they used, again, they knew passwords, they knew things like that, and also having access to some bank information was the reason why they had it. And they had access, to the monthly statements they sent. So they did their homework before they actually called these individuals to go and do it. Again, getting very smart, just even on the individual level, not even talking the sophistication levels that we see from these ransomware groups, nation states, things to that effect. So today we really struggle with what does it look like for these attacks, and how are adversaries continuously breaking through our security defenses. If you look at the data breaches that are happening as of today or last week or the week before that, or whatever happens on the news, these are organizations that have sophisticated security programs. They have education awareness programs. They have, phishing campaigns and penetration tests and things that they have across the board that try to protect their organization against it. But yet we still see these organizations fall. And what we really fail to realize, I think, in the security industry is that, our security programs take a really, really, really long time to build. I was the chief security officer for Diebold for a number of years. And I'll throw that out there. I came in after the voting machine issues, by the way. I wasn't there while they had all the voting machine issues. I came in after to help fix their security program. I'd like to throw that caveat in there, not get blamed for that. But help build their cybersecurity program. That security program took a long time to build. It took years of building a security program. And even when you have your 3-year roadmap, of the program that you're building, 3 years later, you're going to have another 3-year roadmap. You're going to have another 3-year roadmap, and you're going to continuously be building a cybersecurity program because it's never done. Now, you're talking about changing everything an organization does. If you're putting in multi-factor authentication, if you're putting in, new VPN controls or cloud-centric controls, you're moving off of new technology to a different technology. These complexities continue to come up, and we have to interface literally with every single type of organization out there, with every single business unit within our organization to really make these types of changes. So again, it takes a long time. And so what most organizations do is they, do temporary technology fixes. So they'll install, an endpoint detection and response tool or EDR. They'll install a new intrusion prevention system. They'll move to something different so that it stopgaps some of the major problems that they have while they try to fix everything else that's out there. So I think, the big issue that you start to run into is, these temporary fixes do help in some cases, but the gap between your technology footprint, the changes you're making, the historical and legacy things that you have out there, and all of that combined really makes it opportunistic for these attackers, and they recognize it. And then we try to pawn it to the cloud. Hey, we're just going to send it out here to the cloud and everything's going to be okay. We start to see, hey, these adversaries are moving to that. Now, the truth of the matter is, with all the talk of, sentient beings and creating super intelligence and things like that with artificial intelligence and machine learning and everything else, we haven't seen this catastrophic event happen, but we do see catastrophic events hitting businesses all the time. Ransomware is still one of the largest, threats that every single organization faces, regardless of what industry vertical you're in. And they predominantly, and here's the thing, they will use social engineering quite a bit, but they don't care. They'll still, profile your external perimeter. They'll still look at what other ways they can break in. But a lot of times we still see to this day, it's going in through social engineering. And we just dealt with a case recently. It was a large steel manufacturing company. And this is actually a pretty interesting one. So they social engineered one of the IT folks, called up, claimed, to have a bunch of issues and was able to essentially get the IT person to download and execute something on their computer. Now, obviously, that's probably a bad practice, but the IT person thought that they were helping. It was claiming that there was a big business meeting that was happening the next week, and he had to get access to the software, and the software wasn't working. So the individual tried downloading the software to make sure it worked on his system. It had a command and control wrapped into it that gave the individuals access to their computer itself. And then from there, they moved on. Now, what was interesting about this ransomware case specifically was one of the other IT admins was doing just normal administration, went to go log into a domain controller. And when they logged into the domain controller, they saw that this user was already logged in. This other IT admin was logged in at 2 o'clock in the morning. And, he goes on Slack and he says, "Hey, dude, I see you're logging here. Can I boot you off this machine?" And the other IT guy, luckily at 2 o'clock in the morning, was like, "Hey, I first of all, why are you up at 2 o'clock in the morning? Second, why am I answering at 2 o'clock in the morning?" IT guys, we don't ever sleep really, I guess. And then he said, "I haven't been on that domain controller in like 6 months. That's really weird." And so they knew that they had an incident at this point and that an attacker had logged into the machine. And instead of being very methodical with it and trying to figure out what they had access to from the attacker's perspective, they booted that user off of the domain controller. And so when they booted that attacker off of the domain controller, it let the attacker know that, hey, we've been found. We need to start doing the encryption event right now. And they had roughly around 80% of their entire infrastructure encrypted overnight and completely shut down their entire business. So very methodical, right? They learn your business, they learn your organizations, they try to find your backup servers. How can I make as much damage as possible to an organization to really start to have this type of impact on them to get as much access as possible? And then from there, they start the ransomware events and go after. And, regardless of what industry vertical you're in, you are susceptible to these types of attacks, even if you're small to medium-sized businesses. And that's what we used to see all the time, is that these ransomware groups were only going after small to medium-sized businesses. That has drastically changed. Threat modeling, you look at all of the different businesses. I mean, it's large organizations, it's small organizations, it's medium-sized, it's startups, it's pizza shops, you name it. They're going after whatever they possibly can to gain access to your infrastructure. And so what we face today, and really the main risk to organizations, is that the adversary's capabilities continue to progress. So every time you pay a ransom, right? Every time an organization pays money for ransomware groups, they reinvest that money in better tooling, better developers, better staff, better ways to support their customers, which is these, what we call affiliates. So interesting enough, if you look at, does everybody remember the Colonial Pipeline hack that happened that shut down, oil processing and things like that? What's interesting is that they didn't actually access the gas pipelines. The gas pipelines were never actually hacked. What was hacked was this software that tracks what type of liquids was actually in the accounting software to charge what type of liquids were in the actual tubes themselves. And so they couldn't discern, hey, is it oil in here, or is it something else, or a different type of liquid? So they had to shut down, the gas production because they didn't know what was in those actual pipes, because they had encrypted those systems. Interesting enough, with Colonial Pipeline, they ended up paying the ransom, but also if you go down to the story of it, they paid the ransom because they're trying to recover as fast, but the ransomware recovery tool was so slow that eventually they were actually able to restore from backups and other data they were able to retrieve. So they didn't even need to pay the ransom in the first place, and they were still able to recover. They never used the decryption of the ransomware event that they got from the attackers. And so a lot of times, we're paying this ransom. Sometimes you don't need to, sometimes we do, to save the businesses, but they're making millions and millions of dollars. One of the largest ransomware groups out there currently has made over $300 million up to date, currently today over the past several years, off of ransomware. So the Black Hat folks, Alpha V, they're the main groups out there right now today. There was a bigger one called Conti that kind of fractured and broke up. They went to different groups. It's this whole system designed for, fraudulent business activities, mostly coming out of Russia, and we're not able to go and snag them, unfortunately, because they're working with impunity with the Russian government. We did actually break out at Binary Defense. We did a 2-year unmasking of a number of the folks that were running one of the largest ransomware groups. And we did work with Europol and had 17 consecutive raids, people arrested, things like that. The group shut down. It was called Emotet. And unfortunately, they respawned back up and started up again 6 months later. So it's a major problem. We're losing, obviously we're losing a lot of money. They're making a ton of money, and they continue to increase their sophistication and capabilities. And the interesting part about this is that they recognize that most organizations and companies have antivirus and EDR products and things of that effect. Their attacks are designed to circumvent those detection criteria. And that's why it's so important, to educate your users, to have an education awareness program, to focus on, the people aspects of this, because that's what's ultimately, I think, going to save you a major data breach. If you have 20,000 sensors versus, 2 or 3, or they're able to circumvent your technological controls, having users be able to report is your last line of defense. So this is one of my favorite breaches to talk about. And this is the Uber hack. This was a couple of years ago, but it's such a good story, especially for today and for this event. With the Uber hack, what was really interesting about this is, and it's literally such a failure on the human side as much as it is on the technological side as well. We expect our users to report events, right? And we hope that we do based on the education awareness we give them. Well, this group called Lapsus, which came out of nowhere, and they were owning like everybody out there. Like they owned LG. They completely broke into LG. They stole Bing source code from Microsoft. I mean, they were just like hacking all these people left and right. There's these big data breaches happening from this brand new group called Lapsus. Turns out they're a bunch of 16-year-old kids out of the UK just having fun. And they were able to break into some of the most sophisticated cybersecurity programs that are out there, being 16 years old and just having fun. They didn't do it for money. They just published the data and were like, we're the best hackers out there. We're going to continue to hack. It's going to be a great time. They eventually got arrested, obviously, and went to jail and all that good stuff. But they also hacked Uber. And Uber has a cybersecurity program. They do penetration testing, they do education awareness. They, design security systems, architecture, things like that. So what happened to where they owned Uber? And they didn't just like hack Uber a little bit. They owned everything Uber has, like source code. They had access to their AWS infrastructure that powered all of their apps. I mean, they had everything, like every single thing you could possibly imagine that would be sensitive to Uber, its customer information, everything was completely compromised from these 16, 17-year-old kids. So how'd they do it? Well, first and foremost, they bought some credentials online from somebody that had phished somebody within Uber. So they had phished an individual contractor, and those credentials were valid. And so on the dark web and the black market, there's a lot of groups that sell different pieces of information, whether it's identity, dossiers, things like that. But there's also ones that just do mass phishing campaigns across the board. And then once they get hits and they are able to harvest usernames and passwords, they sell those to people that might be, want to go for a ransomware event, for example. So, the groundwork is already laid. You already have valid usernames and passwords. Now I just have to do the hacking events, right? So these groups just, sell back and forth and share information back and forth and things like that. And so these kids bought, compromised Uber credentials for $17, which, pretty hefty price tag for $17. Now, the interesting part is they went to go log into a Cisco VPN concentrator. And when they went to go log in, it had what was called push notifications for multi-factor authentication. Hey, good. They're doing 2-factor authentication. That's exactly what we preach and we talk about. What was interesting, though, is that the contractor that worked for them got to pop up on his phone, and it said, hey, are you currently logging in right now? Yes or no? And the individual said, no, I'm not logging in right now. Good. Okay. Hey, the program's working. The education awareness is working. Everything's working as designed. However, the individual didn't notify anybody that that he wasn't logging in to Uber. So that's a miss, but hey, still protected, right? Well, the attackers got a little bit impatient. They did it again. And they said, hey, are you logging in right now? And the Uber contractor's like, no, I'm not logging in right now. They did it 17 times. 17 times they prompted that individual user, are you logging in, yes or no? And what did that user do on the 18th time? They hit yes, I'm logging in right now to stop the spam notifications. So after the 18th time of hitting no, I'm not logging in, the person got annoyed and hit yes, I'm logging in, which then gave the adversaries access to the VPN concentrator to Uber's internal network. And from there, the attackers already had valid domain usernames and passwords. They sprayed the network looking for other things. So they found a network share that had a PowerShell script in it. And in that PowerShell script contained hard-coded username and password for their Thycotic password access management server, which is like the keys to the kingdom. That is their multi-factor authentication solution that houses all of their usernames and passwords. It's literally game over at that point. They had access to every single system across the board because of that one PowerShell script that had a hard-coded password because of the user that after the 18th time clicked approve and allowed them access into the infrastructure. So you can see here a combination of technical failures, lack of detection, monitoring, protection features, but also on the human side, how devastating these types of attacks truly can be. And again, people were so surprised that there was this hard-coded password, PowerShell script with passwords in it, We find this all the time. And on every single network, there's something like this every single time, whether it's on a SharePoint site, whether it's on a file share. People code and put things up all the time and don't think about the ramifications of it. And oftentimes you're able to find a password.xls that has usernames and passwords in it. It's what we call our pillaging phase of going through and doing penetration testing. These are the things that really start to bite you in the butt as you're going through and doing it. So when you look at the advancements, of social engineering today and what these attackers are doing, it has gotten much more sophisticated, but sometimes it's not needed, right? You look at the Uber case, they didn't need to call anybody up on the phone. They didn't need to impersonate anybody. But I will say that the ones that they do, they're very good at doing it. They understand how businesses work. They understand the lingo. They research the company and organization. They impersonate individuals they have a good understanding of. They come up with pretext. They spend a lot of methodical time going after it, because at the end of the day, you look at, some of these payout amounts. I mean, $20 million, $28 million, $32 million. I mean, for doing a week of research to get $30 million, they're going to do that. The payouts are there. The time and investment is there. And AlphaV, one of the biggest ransomware groups out there, they are some of the best at social engineering. They're really good at calling people up on the phone, whether it's the help desk or individual employees. There was a case just about 2 weeks ago with one of our customers, and we do ongoing threat hunting exercises, right? And one of the things that we found was we profiled baseline, an organization. So what's normal software, what's not normal software? And if you think about it, you have all the commonality configurations up here, right? This is going to be, your Microsoft operating system limitations, Microsoft Office, your normal stack of things that you see, within an organization. And this organization used Microsoft Intune, and they used Microsoft Remote Assistance for help desk, activities. So in the event you call up the help desk, you need some issues, you would use Microsoft's Remote Assistance to then remote into there. The help desk folks, IT admins, would log into their machines and do their stuff. Well, we noticed on 2 machines, again, looking at that baseline, here's our normal baseline of software. We noticed that there was 2 deviations down here of TeamViewer, which is an application. It's a commercial enterprise grade application tool used for remote assistance. Well, why is there 2 machines that have TeamViewer installed in their environment when the rest of the organization is using remote assistance? Now, most of the time that's going to be, hey, there's a deviation of process. Someone was trying to help somebody out and something happened. What we found, though, is that AlphaV, that specifically this hacker group, was doing the preliminary stages for a ransomware event. They called these 2 individuals up, impersonating the help desk, had them download remote assistance software, and then backdoor their machines, which completely circumvented their detection criteria. So again, the user's downloading tools based off a phone call. They spoofed the phone number coming from the help desk themselves, the actual IT help desk phone number. Again, very difficult to discern what's real and what's not based off of the amount of homework that they're actually going and doing it. With Colonial Pipeline, for example, it wasn't a social engineering event. They had found a backup VPN concentrator that didn't have multi-factor authentication on it, and again, had compromised credentials. So you can see the variations here, the vast differences of everything that's going on. Again, parlaying this down into the human individual one, we just had a scam recently for a high net worth individual, happened to be a famous high net worth individual. 2:00 in the morning, they get a phone call from their daughter. The daughter's in a panic, daughter's crying, "Dad, I've been kidnapped." Well, I'm a parent, I have 3 kids. If I hear that, I'm awake, right? What's going on? And the daughter's crying, "Dad, I was coming out of the play last night." The daughter had gone to a play that night. Daughter, I come out of the play last night. They kidnapped me. They're right here. They want you to send money. They're going to kill me, Dad. Obviously, every parent's worst nightmare, right? So then these attackers get on the phone and they're like, "Yep, we have your daughter. Obviously, if you don't wire us money and stay on the phone, if you get off the phone, she's dead. If you don't wire us the money, we're going to kill her." So the dad wires money to these attackers. They walk them through the steps of how to wire everything else, go and wire the money out. And then eventually, after about an hour on the phone, again, not hanging up, the dad hangs up the phone, calls the police. Police go to the daughter's house. The daughter's 23, has her own place, her own apartment. Went to her apartment. Daughter was fine, sleeping in bed, everything, nothing had happened. They had used voice modulation software that they grabbed off of her voice from social media to clone her voice, then to impersonate them to actually go and do this specific type of fraud. And that's becoming more and more common. Now, they already knew a lot of information about her because of her social media presence. She said she was going to the play that night. So they knew that she was at a play that night. And then these attackers then, created this whole scam and the whole scheme to get the father to wire money. It was about $120,000 worth of money that was wired out. So, again, the sophistication levels that we start to see on this is becoming much more advanced with things like AI. And it's not just voice modulation. It's not just, things like that. It's also infrastructure, coding. It's augmenting a lot of different ways that are helping these adversaries spin up infrastructure faster, rewrite their code so that it circumvents most of the detections and attacks that are out there. It's becoming increasingly more popular for these groups in time. And when you look at generative AI, for example, what's interesting, we've seen over a 370% increase just this year alone in business email compromises. Now, why is that? Well, if you look at right around the same time when ChatGPT got released in generative AI, well, generative AI, what is it? It's literally perfect English. It's a assistant that can translate any language to whatever. It's really amazing at language. It understands, what you're trying to accomplish, and it writes it out for you. The biggest bar of entry for these groups was having a native English speaker to do the social engineering aspects for financial fraud, right? So if you're interfacing with somebody in accounting, if he had broken English, well, it's not going to look right. If you don't know English at all, it's not going to look right as you're conversing back and forth. With generative AI, they remove the bar of entry for an interpreter. Now these really low-level sophistication groups can use native-speaking English now to do their social engineering efforts to go after these individuals, employees, and things like that in accounting to get the wire, fraud transfer going, all of that stuff. So again, a massive increase in business email compromise alone, and it sucks because the FBI is already completely overloaded with these. You stack on 370% increase into that. They're dealing with those. They're not focusing on all the other cybersecurity incidents that are happening. And by the way, my personal friend that got hit with this specific thing, they depleted all their accounts. The FBI won't even look at them because it was under $5 million now, because that's their bar level entry of actually going and doing it. So they have no recourse or way to report it or way to recoup the funds. It's a major issue across the board that we're starting to see with these various groups that are out there. So I talked a lot about what we're seeing, and I showed a lot of stories and examples of what's actually happening out there. Now, how do we actually fix this, right? And it's, the fix isn't a fix, because if I could fix cybersecurity, then I wouldn't be here talking right now. I'd have some island that I owned in the middle of the Caribbean. However, I do have a solution to fix cybersecurity. So my solution is, and if you can pull this off, then you'll be the first ever. It'd be amazing. If you could hire one cybersecurity professional for every one employee you have, we'd be fine. We wouldn't have to worry about this anymore, because you could literally sit behind Bob and be like, Bob, don't click that link. Okay, click the link. Okay, I'm going to go grab this computer and triage it, right? So one employee to every one person would be amazing for security. If one security personnel professional to every one employee, cybersecurity would be solved at that point, because we wouldn't have to worry about it. However, we obviously don't have that luxury in this industry. And so the way that you have to look at cybersecurity is both a technological fix, which a lot of this is technological. It's also a business fix, but it's also a people fix, right? So the technological, social aspects of things become extremely important to fix the problem that we see today. And what we really lack in most organizations today is true visibility into our environment, what we call data telemetry. Being able to take our data and send it somewhere, either on-prem or on a cloud or whatever, into some central location that we can monitor for deviations of patterns of behavior. And that's really what we have to move to as an industry, is looking at the behavioral aspects of our business. And the reason I say that is, if you think about your business is completely different than any other business that's out there. You might be 20 years old, 50 years old, 100 years old. You might have old technology, new technology. You might be cloud-centric. You might be hybrid. I guarantee you don't have, your network is completely different, built completely different than any other company that's out there. Just based on, whoever the IT admin was that first set up in the first place, or what you started from a startup perspective. You might be predominantly cloud infrastructure, whatever. So your environment, how you do business, the CRM systems you use, the people you hire, where they're located, all different, right? And those behaviors are what makes your company unique, and what makes you special too, by the way. Your intellectual property, how you do your services, all of those other things make you unique. So what we can do, and we can use this against these adversaries, is understanding what is normal and what is not. So if an attacker installs a unique remoting, type of software in your environment, if you have the right data telemetry and you understand the data that you're sending back, that should be a red flag saying, hey, something's not right here. We should probably investigate and look into this, because it's abnormal. It's unique. It's not what we're traditionally used to seeing installed in an environment. Let's investigate this. So the deviations of patterns of behavior and understanding what your business looks like and what normal looks like. There's a great book out there called The Long Tail. It's an old 80s book about sales. And remember before I talked a little bit about, this is the normal baseline of software and down here's deviations. Well, if you apply that same concept, the long tail is the same thing. You have all of these things up here and it dips down into these edge cases down here. And these little bubbles, these little variations are really where we struggle with in cybersecurity. Whether that's a user picking up a phone and then downloading something and it's now beaking out to a website it never has before. Those small blips are where we can spend a lot of our time finding a lot of these different areas. And if you look at probably some of the most necessity type roles within an organization, to me, that's really in the threat intel, threat hunting space. In cybersecurity, threat hunting to me is probably one of the most important cybersecurity roles that we could possibly have. I would also say, somebody focused on cybersecurity education awareness to our users as well, equally important. When we're looking at baselining an organization environment, we need to recognize that data, what data we need, and then what are those variations that we're looking at? So really being able to build detections and understanding what these attackers are doing. So you look at most of these groups, there was I mentioned them earlier before briefly, but there was a big ransomware group called Conti out of Russia. They say they're not from Russia. They speak native Russian. They were pro the Russian invasion into Ukraine, and they are definitely Russian. They're all from Russia. Now, here's the part though. Conti themselves was a really large organization, estimated around 300 employees, 300 people working for, this organized crime group, basically, right? It sounds insane. They had, help desks. So, if you're hacking into something and you ran into trouble, you could ask a better hacker to help you out. And they had, chat software and things like that. They had formal methodologies, just like a penetration testing company would. They had special tools that they developed. They weaponized it. They bought security products. They bought, Carbon Black and CrowdStrike and other ones so that they could get around, the technology when they built their weapons and tools so that they can be successful with what they're doing. What was interesting about Conti, though, is that, if you look at their methodologies of how they do things, they were using normal tools that we use every single day in our environment. So things like TrustedSec, for example. But here's the thing, do you really use TrustedSec anymore? If you do, is it from specific servers and systems or from specific admins that prefer to use that tool? Again, your normal baseline is, okay, well, Bob in IT likes to use TrustedSec, cool. But if Bob from IT or if we see TrustedSec being used not from Bob in IT, that's something we need to look at. Why is that being executed in the first place? And so understanding our data, understanding how it's happening, and is where we really have to move. And if you think about the time period that this takes, okay, so our security programs take 3 years, and after 3 years, we have another 3 years, and after 3 years, we have another 3 years. It's this long-term vision of cybersecurity that takes forever because our businesses aren't going to just flip a switch overnight and do application control or allow listing right away. It takes time to implement controls, and it's never a perfect piece. Whereas monitoring detection, if we have visibility into our cloud infrastructure or on-prem infrastructure or applications, that's data we already have. It doesn't need to wait for all those other things to happen. We can move fast. We can say, okay, this data here is baseline. Let's look for those deviations. We can move today. We can move tomorrow. We can move much faster than building a 3-year roadmap. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do the 3-year roadmap and your governance structure and building out your security programs and everything else. You absolutely have to do that. But your main priority, especially this stopgap, right, between the time it takes us to implement protection to the time it takes us to actually do, we need some things in there to build that capabilities around monitoring detection. So monitoring is extremely important. Having visibility is extremely important. And then continuously educating our users around the types of threats that are out there is very important. When I was at Diebold, whenever we got a phishing campaign or somebody tried to do social engineering on us, we send it to the entire company. This is what it looks like. Here's the indicators that we're seeing that are unique. We would never ask you for this. If we're going to be implementing something, we're not going to ask you, in 2 days that you have to respond. You immediately are going to shut your account down. So we kept reinforcing that all the time to people around what to look for, how to do things. And we had a lot of success with it. So again, the education piece, the people piece, very important, the technological piece too, and the visibility you have into your environment becomes extremely important. When we start looking at some proactive measures that you can do, the visibility to me, again, number one, being able to see the data, look for deviations, build those use cases out. One of the main ways, and I won't get too super technical into this, I can if you want to, but one of the main methods that most attackers will typically use to get initial access into a system is what we call living off the land binaries and scripts. And the way that this technique works is that Microsoft has all of these different, applications. Linux has all these different applications. If you launch calculator, for example, it's calc.exe, right? So we know as going into an organization for targeting a Microsoft platform, you have all of these default things installed. Well, some of the applications have functionality in them that are very enticing for us as attackers. Like, for example, one of the most prolific ones that is used very often is what we call regsvr32.exe, and it lives in your system32 directory and it can be accessed by a regular user. Now, why would they want that specific application? Well, it has what's called download and execution functionality. So it will download a file from the internet and it will interpret that code. It's called a scriptlet object, and it will use that code and then execute code on the system itself. Now, why that's important is because regsvr32 is a normal operating system application, right? So it's not going to really throw off a lot of radar unless you understand what baseline is, right, against your environment. So it's using a legitimate application that is built into Windows to download its code and execute that code to get code execution onto that system to hopefully go and detect it. Now, this one's very prominent. It's not used very often. So a lot of the EDR products and things like that have built detections around that, which is great. But a good baseline is, well, hey, we know that adversaries use these living off the lands. There's a whole project that lists all of these out. It's called the LawBAS project. And let's go through each one, baseline our environment, say, well, does any regular user in our environment ever execute these specific applications? Well, no, they never do. They're system applications. Why would a regular user be calling them in the first place? Anytime that process is created, we should automatically move that machine and contain it. Move it off of the network so that it can no longer communicate with anything else, because it's going to be bad no matter what. Or we can just monitor it and throw up a, priority 1 alarm when, a specific law bin is actually kicked off within the environment. So again, very specific things that we can do to look for unusual behavior that's, patternistic in our own environment, that are those deviations of behavior. Those save us. And I'll tell you, my whole career is based off of offensive security, so breaking into computer systems. I do extremely well with social engineering. I was known as one of the best social engineers out there. One of my best friends was the late Kevin Mitnick, who passed away, real famous hacker. He was one of my best friends. And Kevin and I used to do social engineering events all the time. It used to be a competition. Now, Kevin was way better than me. I'll admit that. But sometimes I would beat him on the technical aspects of things. But social engineering and offensive security is some of my biggest things. When I go into organizations as a penetration tester, as a red teamer, the people that stop my attacks from the simulation perspective are the ones that understand their own environment, the deviations of patterns of behavior. And that's really where you start to get a lot of, it becomes much harder for me as an attacker to go after this organization because I don't know what's there. Now, think about this. If I'm going into an organization, I go to LinkedIn and I type in, look up all their IT admins. Typically, the security folks, the IT admins will put what type of security experience they have, right? And they'll say, hey, I use CrowdStrike, or I use SentinelOne. And by the way, all great products. I'm not knocking them. They're great, but they're out of the box, right? And unless they've made those products their own, well, I know what's going to be built into CrowdStrike. I know what's going to be built into SentinelOne. So my tools and techniques and attacks are going to be to circumvent those products and tools. So again, if I haven't made those tools my own based on my normal environment and baselining, then I'm in a world for hurt for these new adversaries that are out there and the sophistication levels they have, because they're getting around those tools and technology. So again, technical controls are important in many cases. However, I can't emphasize enough the sensor component that I mentioned before. If you have 20,000 employees, I'd rather have 20,000 sensors than 10 sensors that are technological. Whenever you can impact people's behavior, change behavior becomes really important. And what I found very effective when I was the chief security officer for Diebold was when I can relate it back to them personally. So we'd have a monthly newsletter. We'd have rewards in there. So we'd have like crossword puzzles and things like that. And it would actually have rewards in there. So if you the first 5 that get it got, a $200 gift card or something like that, right? So it incentivized people to kind of have fun with it, play around with it. But we also gave very, specific like links and emails and things like that made it very fun for users to kind of understand what was happening personally. How can I protect my children? Fortnite has one of the largest demographics of online child predators. So, hey, that's a good thing to bring up from an education awareness perspective and how to protect your children, from child predators, specifically trying to coax information off of you. There's the Holy Bible app, believe this or not. There's an app in the iPhone app store and the Android app store called the Holy Bible. If I saw, my kid trying to download that, I'd be like, oh, cool. They're trying to download the Holy Bible and read something on religion. It's actually a massive social media network where you can friend anybody, you can direct message people and talk to them. And it happens to have a large online demographic of child predators. So, again, these types of education and awareness things that you can give out there to people will resonate with what you're trying to accomplish from a cybersecurity perspective, and hopefully give them tidbits to change behavior. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, they're not cybersecurity experts. They never will be cybersecurity experts. Are there things that we can do to at least get warning signs out there to help establish a level of trust between the security team and those individuals, so that when they actually see something, they can actually go and report it, and have that type of rapport to report it and not feel like they're going to get, slammed for missing something or doing something, like a false positive or something like that. So again, I can't emphasize enough the education awareness piece, ongoing education awareness, continue to reinforce it, the testing around that, all becomes really, really important as you start to go through. But the last thing I'll do before we close out, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions. Nothing's perfect, right? We haven't figured out a perfect solution other than the one security person for one employee, which I want somebody just to do that. It'd be awesome to see if that actually works. But listen, these are all about layered defenses, right? It's why we have technological controls. We're trying to reduce the risk and the footprint, but in the event that something happens, trying to minimize and contain the damage to the organization. I don't care if Bob in sales gets compromised, but if Bob in sales gets compromised, and now all of a sudden they have access to our server infrastructure, they have access to our backup infrastructure, and it's a massive, ransomware event with encrypting our entire infrastructure. Well, that's a major problem. That hits our entire business, right? So how do we reduce that risk, both parlaying it with the technological controls and the education controls? That's really where all of this comes into play to be perfect. And what we've seen from successful security programs, we've seen this time and time again. We have a number of customers that have completely thwarted off a number of extremely sophisticated groups, including nation states like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, et cetera. So it is possible. There's a lot of wins, but you don't see the wins in the news. You see the losses, right? And there's a lot of winning happening across the board in this industry. It is getting harder for these adversaries, and we need to continue to make it harder and innovate on our sides in a lot of different ways. So with that, I'd like to open up for some questions.
That was tremendous. I think it's such a solid way to end kind of HRM Con is really talking about the adversary. And like, I had a couple themes I wanted to pull on, but I know we don't have a ton of time. How do we celebrate the wins, right? How do we, like, I felt that last statement really hit home, because it's like, no one on the news is like, oh, Jim Smith, lowly customer support guy, didn't click on a phishing email. Good job. Like, how do we get people to realize like this isn't a zero-sum game, and investing in the people aspect of cybersecurity actually has benefit?
Yeah, it's a good question, Drew. And it's kind of an unfortunate thing of our industry, right? The negative news is what makes the news feeds. It's also what we've historically used to scare upper leadership and management into giving us funding for our programs, right? Like, hey, we're telling you, like, look at that breach over there, look at that breach over there. We're going to get hit next, right? It's how we've always kind of traditionally worked, and we don't celebrate and break down the use cases of success. And actually, that'd be a great talk to just have, hey, what are the wins that we've had in cybersecurity to actually show what actually is effective in stopping us as attackers? And I think we need to do a much better job of that. And that'd be an amazing thing if in a company reported, hey, we stopped a massive, highly sophisticated cyber attack, and here's how we did it, right? Yeah. I think that would be an amazing thing. And I think a lot of people would be interested in that, because there's a lot of life lessons and lessons that we can learn in cybersecurity for the ones that have actually implemented cybersecurity programs that have successfully thwarted these. We just don't do it, unfortunately, enough, and at all. To be honest, I can't remember the last time I saw on the news, hey, this company stopped a major cybersecurity breach. I'm going on CNBC tomorrow to talk about a massive cybersecurity breach, of a failure of a security program, never the successes. So I think we should definitely see more of that, hopefully.
Yeah. And I'm going to think about that as well. There's got to be a good way to shout that out. The other topic is like, it's funny you brought up the beekeeper. Like, I saw that movie, and that first 10, 15 minutes was so heartbreaking, but so real.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, there's all the tropes on cybersecurity and hacking. And I know you've been involved in film that tries to make things realistic, but, like, I'm wondering if the general public watching that movie, if their general assumption is like, that'll never happen to me. They're like, I feel like I stopped my dad from losing tens of thousands of dollars every 3 months. Like, I feel like he's always calling me, hey, Visa called me again and they said I've been hacked. And I'm like, no, they're the hackers. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, do you feel like there's any way, like if we're communicating with end users on like how to communicate with our family, like what's the best way to make this not feel like we're being sensationalists here and that this is legitimate and people are literally losing life savings daily due to just falling victim to something so simplistic as a person on a phone?
Yeah, it's a great question, Drew. And I had the same issue with family members, people that I'm around with, like they'll call. I had my aunt, I won't mention her name because I won't throw her on the bus, but my aunt literally, called me up and she's like, I just fell for a scam. I'm like, Aunt, you know me. I'm like the cybersecurity guy of the family. Like, like you need to call me if someone is, doing this type of stuff. Like, but they don't think about that. And, I think the issue is that, they're so good at, creating a normal situation of something, normalizing it. Hey, we're going to get your money back. We're going to do this, no big deal, deflating what the situation is. And then from there they get hit and they don't expect that to happen. So I think it's, I think there's a lesson to be learned here where we sensationalize the big data breaches, but we don't talk about the scams that are hitting individual people that often. And I think we really need to try to get more awareness out there to people of what they can do. Like, for example, just simple steps of if Chase calls you, cool, thanks, Chase. I'm going to hang up. I'm going to go to Chase's website and call them directly from their website phone number. That alone would stop that entire thing from happening, right? But they don't think about that from the scamming aspects of things because they just assume it's normal. They trust what's on their phone. Their phone is telling them Chase is calling them. They don't know that that's a problem. And so we've made technology really easy for these folks, which is then causing this gap in knowledge around what's actually possible. So, it's really up to us in the security industry to help make the world a safer place and to educate folks. And, we definitely got to do a better job of it. There's no question.
Yeah, I remember about a year ago when one of the first, voice takeover kidnapping cases went public, and I was sitting at a restaurant, and it was like a young girl. She was probably 20 with her grandparents who were probably in their 60s, and she was like, "This is my safe word. If someone ever calls and says I'm kidnapped, like this," and I just wanted to applaud her efforts there because it's like it seems so far-fetched, but with ChatGPT, with technology, with scripts, like that can happen at scale insanely easily. This has been really great. We're definitely over time. I just saw, your new book is coming out, so congratulations on that. We'll make sure we send out the community when that gets launched. Thank you so much for your time and all that you do for us in the cybersecurity world. Being able to pair the technical side with the human side, I think it's such a talent and is needed, and really grateful for the time you spent with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And what an amazing event that you put on for folks. So thank you all for what you do here as well, for Living Security and for this conference. Such an important topic, and hopefully the folks enjoyed it, and happy to be here anytime. So thanks again, Drew, and appreciate everybody having me.